I'm Kevin Stillwagon, admitting that I turned jet fuel into about 1 million miles of white stripes in the sky. In addition to being a chiropractor, I was a major airline pilot for pre-strike Eastern Airlines in 1987, then Northwest Airlines that merged with Delta Airlines, and I ultimately retired in 2020. For more than 3 decades, I have flown Boeing 727s, DC-9s, DC-10s, and Airbuses all over this non-flat Earth, leaving about 1 million miles of white stripes behind me. The white stripes are not just water vapor. They are visible jet exhaust emissions. And I have observed and photographed those emissions up close and personal from above, below, and sometimes right inside of them. Whether the jet exhaust is visible or not depends entirely on atmospheric conditions. And you can prove this yourself by using windy.com and using the free add-on called Contrail Finder. The Contrail Finder uses measurable water content aloft to predict contrail formation. By clicking anywhere on the map, users can instantly determine if jet exhaust will be visible in the sky. Additionally, it indicates whether these contrails will persist and evolve into sun-blocking high cirrus clouds. If the app says no contrails today, step outside and verify the sky is clear. Then go to adsbexchange.com, the world's largest source of unfiltered flight data, and see what your eyes cannot see. You'll see that there are many aircraft up there in the troposphere emitting toxic jet exhaust, invisible to you on those clear sky days. Yes, jet exhaust is toxic, whether you see it or not. And when you see it, you are not just looking at frozen water vapor. By weight, most of what you see are visible ice crystals, but each crystal contains a nucleus that could be toxic under certain conditions. The nuclei are mostly engine soot or carbon particles from combustion and sulfate particles formed from the sulfur that is naturally in jet fuel, but it can be removed as it was from truck and marine diesel fuel. The engine soot is composed of highly ordered graphitic soot, sometimes called onion-like carbon, verified by sampling jet exhaust under an electron microscope. But those are ordinary combustion particles, not a secret additive and not graphene. Graphene is an engineered two-dimensional sheet of carbon molecules that is not in jet exhaust. You can prove this by running your finger quickly through a candle flame or a match flame. The black residue that shows up on your finger is graphitic soot, not graphene. When the world was using candles for light and also burning wood and coal for heat, we were breathing lots of that graphitic soot in high concentrations, explaining higher mortality from respiratory diseases back then. When we shifted to cleaner sources of light and heat, improved our sanitation, and improved our nutrition, mortality across all communicable diseases dropped, and it wasn't due to vaccines. Think about that. There are also trace amounts of metals from engine wear and some fuel impurities that are in jet exhaust. These are real particles. And yes, in high concentrations near airports, they have measurable respiratory and cardiovascular effects, even though the jet exhaust there is mostly not visible, even during full thrust takeoffs. At cruise altitudes where jet exhaust sometimes is visible, 8 miles above your head, the toxic soot particles get diluted over vast volumes of air, and most of them never reach the ground in meaningful amounts. We have the technology to reduce sulfur and aromatic compounds in jet fuel that create those toxic soot particles. If we do that, there will be fewer visible white stripes in the sky and less environmental and health impacts near high-density airports. If the Windy app says that contrails are visible in your area, you can also use ADSB Exchange to find out exactly what flights they are. Other online apps like FlightAware and Flight Radar 24 sometimes will not show all flights, as private and corporate jets can remain anonymous on those apps, but not on ADSB Exchange that uses the signals emitted from all aircraft flying above 10,000 feet. In fact, it was federally mandated on January the 1st, 2020, that all aircraft flying above 10,000 feet must have an operative transponder turned on and emitting an ADSB out signal. ADSB stands for Automatic Dependent Surveillance Broadcast, and this is necessary for radar identification and traffic separation. Only the military in certain stealth-required operations are permitted to turn the ADSB off. So, if they want to remain stealthy, they most certainly would not be leaving a white stripe in the sky behind them visible to the naked eye. Let that sink in. If you, like Dane Wigington, want to believe that the military or some other top secret operation purposefully sprays 40 to 60 million tons of chemicals into the sky every year, you believe something that is logistically not possible. It would take about 1,000 wide-body jets, completely converted with no seats, all tanks, flying 24 hours a day, every day, to make that happen, and it's just not happening. The increase in fuel burns alone to do that would be clearly evident and impossible to hide. Images like these floating around on the internet are not tanks for spraying chemicals. They are used for pumping water through the tanks on weight and balance proving runs for new transport category airworthiness certification. And it's only done on the prototype airframe before they start building the final product on the assembly line. That's a fact. An aircraft converted to spray chemicals would probably look something like that, but consider there are about 6,000 wide-body aircraft in the world that are airworthy right now, and trying to conceal 1,000 of them completely converted for large-scale secret spraying would be completely impossible. The aircraft conversions, the fuel consumption, the flight tracks, and the infrastructure would leave unmistakable signatures in civil aviation records, satellite data, and global fuel markets. You can't hide that. Claims that there are secret hidden canisters, tubes, and nozzles on passenger jet aircraft to spray chemicals do not hold up in the real world of aviation. First of all, there are no switches in the cockpit or the flight deck to activate a system like that. Images like these are complete fabrications. Claims that canisters and tubes are hidden and automatically activated without pilot knowledge don't hold up either. Aircraft undergo an exterior pre-flight walk-around inspection by one of the pilots before every single flight. And believe me, we know every single part that hangs off of wings and engines and protrudes through that fuselage. If there was a tube sticking out of an aircraft that shouldn't be there, maintenance would be immediately called out for further investigation. For example, Dane Wigington, straight off his website, likes to point to this tube near the engine exhaust of an Airbus, an aircraft I have a type rating and several thousand hours on, and I can assure you that is a drain tube for seepage of anything flammable that leaks into the engine compartment from over-servicing or malfunctions. Airbus maintenance manuals and patents explicitly describe them that way. He also made the claim to Tucker Carlson and Jimmy Dore that passenger weights were changed to accommodate the weight of secret canisters, tubes, and nozzles, and they both bought that lie. Wigington has no idea what he's talking about. Airlines use standardized averages set by the Federal Aviation Administration in the United States and similar authorities elsewhere. These are called standard average passenger weights, and they include seasonal adjustments for clothing. The weights increased in the year 2019 from 185 to 190 pounds for the summer and 190 to 195 pounds for the winter. This was done by auditing actual passenger and carry-on bag weights to reach a safe average number. And this wasn't the first time the FAA did that for safety reasons, as the weights also increased in the year 2003 by 5 pounds as well. Weights are critical for calculating takeoff performance for the runway length, and that's why some charter flights in and out of smaller airports will weigh each passenger and their bags. It has nothing to do with secret canisters of chemicals. If secret canisters and tubes were ever found during a heavy maintenance C check or D check, the aircraft would be grounded on the spot. The finding would be formally reported to national regulators and an investigation launched within hours. I challenge any aircraft maintenance person, civil or military, to prove me wrong on that. So why do people continue to believe these lies? Well, when you strip away the institutional credibility of the media, the government, and the scientific establishment, you don't get a population that suddenly starts trusting official sources. Sources like media talking heads, the president, and Fauci, who actually claim to be the science, lied about the safety and the efficacy of the COVID shot, and they got caught, and people who fell for the lies were maimed or killed. As a result, you get a population that starts building its own reality, using whatever visual evidence is available to them, like those white lines in the sky. Then people start questioning everything, even scientific bedrock. For example, the idea catches on that there are no viruses, no antibodies, no immune systems, and no such thing as contagion. And more craziness, like there is no space and the earth is flat. I get it. You've been lied to and you're pissed. And deep down, you want to believe that everything that you were taught were all lies. It's good to be skeptical and question everything, but do not stop thinking. Dig for the truth. Don't throw out authentic, independently reproducible evidence just because fraudulent agencies exist in other domains. The cure for deceit is direct verification, not automatic belief in something like looking up in the sky and believing that those white stripes are purposefully put there to kill you. All right, let's dig for the truth. It is true that those white stripes do sometimes last a really long time and do sometimes combine, forming cirrus clouds that either block the sun, reflecting solar energy away for a net cooling effect, or they trap heat for a net warming effect, depending upon the time of day. Technically, aviation-induced cirrus is geoengineering, but it is not being done purposefully in a controlled manner. It is totally random. Remember, it is purposeful geoengineering and weather modification that is banned in some states. And that's exactly why the bans as written will not make those white stripes disappear from the sky. What is banned are purposeful stratospheric aerosol injections and weather modification attempts by seeding existing clouds, neither of which are those white stripes you see in the sky. The stratosphere is too high and dry for jet exhaust to be visible, and cloud seeding is done by small aircraft rigged like this, with flares at the back of the wings that fly at low altitudes directly above existing clouds where jet exhaust is not visible either. The white stripes you see in the sky are not what has been banned, and that's why you still see them. However, there are ways to control those white stripes in the sky, and we are not controlling them right now. But keep watching, and I'll tell you how we can make the skies bluer. What are those white lines? They are visible jet exhaust emissions. Some people call them contrails, short for condensation trails, and some people call them vapor trails. There are chemicals in those white stripes for sure. So go ahead and call them chemtrails if you wish, but I can assure you the pilots of passenger jet aircraft have no way to turn them on or off with a switch. If you see something like this in the sky that looks like something was turned on and off, the aircraft was just moving through different atmospheric conditions. People routinely send me videos claiming to catch purposeful chemical spraying. So here are a few of those examples. This particular video that looks like something was being turned on and off was taken from the ground south of Tampa, and I was able to confirm with ADS-B that it was this Gulfstream business jet owned by FlexJet descending rapidly out of 26,000 feet into the Orlando Executive Airport on March the 17th, 2024. Visible exhaust can also be seen coming from the auxiliary power unit, or APU, in the tail cone if it is running at altitude for backup electrical power if one of the electrical generators on a wing engine is inoperative, a configuration that I've flown in many times. And people with no aviation knowledge will look at it and wrongly assume that something is being sprayed from the tail cone. Visible condensation can also be seen coming from the tops of wings sometimes. And this is not engine exhaust, nor is it something being sprayed. It is visible aerodynamic condensation that appears under high lift conditions, where the pressure on the top of the wing reduces enough to make the atmospheric water vapor condense and become visible for a short period of time. The military calls them vapes. You can even see these vapes coming off the tips of wing flaps and propellers in humid air. There are no nozzles spraying anything from the tips of flaps and propellers, but it certainly can look that way. Here's part of a video that's been floating around for years, claiming to prove the spraying of chemtrails from a DC-10, an aircraft that I am very familiar with because I flew them for Northwest Airlines. The wing is creating aerodynamic condensation, and people will point to these wing flap track fairings under the wing, claiming that they are nozzles. They are not nozzles, and I can assure you, nothing is being sprayed from wing flap track fairings on DC-10s or the military KC-10, and I challenge anyone in the military to prove me wrong on that one. This is a common video and screenshot purported to be purposeful spraying of something. Well, it most certainly is. It is fuel being pumped out of fuel dump nozzles to reduce the landing weight for an emergency landing. How do I know? Because I was trained for this numerous times on aircraft that I have flown that have an emergency fuel dumping system installed. Why would an aircraft dump fuel? Well, first, heavy jet aircraft can't climb very well if they've had an engine failure, so fuel is immediately dumped for climbing above terrain. Second, the takeoff weights are sometimes thousands of pounds above the maximum certified landing weight, so we dump the fuel in a few minutes over sparsely populated areas instead of flying around for hours and hours to burn it off. So what's in that jet exhaust, whether you can see it or not? To review, when a jet engine burns hydrocarbon fuel, it produces water vapor, carbon dioxide, ultrafine soot, and sulfate particles, and sometimes some trace metals. By ultrafine, I mean 100 nanometers or less. And as I mentioned earlier, this can be a problem if they are inhaled in significant concentrations near high-density airports. But anything existing in jet exhaust 8 miles above your head, whether you see the white stripe or not, can stay aloft for weeks to months, travel thousands of miles, and is so diluted by the time it hits the ground that it will not affect you. The particles that are emitted in the jet exhaust do become nuclei for water vapor to condense and freeze on, and these mix with airborne nuclei that are always up there, put there by volcanoes and also by storms and hurricanes, lifting materials like aluminum, barium, strontium from the Earth's crust and seawater that you can see spreading all over the Earth on this PM 2.5 map. Claims from various sources that the levels of aluminum, barium, strontium, and titanium are significantly increasing are false. The analysis of 30 years of the National Atmospheric Deposition Program and Clean Air Status and Trends Network data indicates no upward trends in aluminum, barium, strontium, or titanium levels, suggesting stable concentrations of these elements over the observed period. The NADP has been monitoring precipitation chemistry across the U.S. since 1978, and CASNet is a long-term EPA monitoring network with over 90 rural sites. Neither data set supports claims of increasing metal contamination of the atmosphere. Jet engine exhaust adds its particles to the mix of natural airborne nuclei that are always present in the atmosphere. If those natural nuclei were not always present, we would never have had visible clouds in the sky before we started flying in the troposphere with combustion engines. Natural sources like volcanoes, dust storms, sea spray, wildfires, biological matter, they all contribute billions of tons of particles per year globally. Aviation exhaust adds roughly 1 million tons per year of soot, sulfate, and trace metal particles. While those exhaust nuclei serve as condensation seeds for ice crystals and visible contrails, they are vastly outnumbered by the natural background. At cruise altitude, exhaust particles mix into and are diluted by this enormous natural reservoir of nuclei already put there by volcanoes, hurricanes, and storms, lifting materials from the Earth's crust and seawater. Jet engines are adding particles to the mix, whether or not it's visible. But more importantly, they're changing the mix. Now, people want to call this cloud seeding, but that is not what this is. Cloud seeding is when hygroscopic chemicals are dropped into existing clouds from directly above them or shooting chemicals into them from below to make rain or snow come out of the clouds. Cloud seeding is really old technology and has been done since the 1950s with Project Cirrus into hurricanes, and in the 1960s with Project Popeye in Vietnam. And it's still happening, except in states that have banned this activity. Cloud seeding is not the white stripes high in the troposphere, so banning cloud seeding will not make white stripes go away. At cruise altitudes, typically 26,000 to 39,000 feet, the air is so cold, like negative 40 degrees centigrade, and moist, that the exhausted water immediately condenses and freezes on those nuclei, forming ice crystal plumes. Whether a trail is short or long depends mainly on the ambient humidity and the temperature. Persistent trails mark regions where natural cirrus clouds would form even without airplanes. However, jets flying in these regions deposit nuclei that become high cirrus clouds. Ice crystal nuclei have been confirmed by in situ sampling done by NASA, NOAA, and university aircraft flying directly behind and inside visible jet exhaust. Soot, sulfate, and mineral particles were the nuclei for the ice crystals, and this was identified by electron microscopy. The nuclei are byproducts of fuel combustion and engine wear, not a secret spray program. This is not new. It's been happening ever since we started flying in the troposphere. Here's a 1957 photograph from the book Cloud Study, a Pictorial Guide, describing how vapor trails become high cirrus clouds, drawn out by high altitude winds. something that I have witnessed myself hundreds of times from above and below the jet I followed or crossed paths with. The exhaust doesn't even have to be from a jet engine. Here's a 1947 video of visible exhaust behind the Boeing 377 Stratocruiser, powered by pistons and fueled by gasoline. Notice how thick and heavy it is, and the occasional gap that makes it look like something was temporarily turned off. The appearance of visible exhaust has changed over the years, for sure. Years ago, fuel combustion was not as clean as it is today, so the exhaust emissions were larger, heavier, sootier, and were constantly visible regardless of the altitude. So, in the early 1970s, the EPA's Clean Air Act demanded actions to make the emissions less visible. Engine manufacturers complied with redesigning combustion sections, using pressure atomizing fuel injection nozzles, and creating high bypass jet engines. High bypass jet engines did reduce the soot, but they made the jet exhaust form ice crystals more easily, spread faster, and last longer. Today, most jet aircraft are using high bypass engines, creating more visible jet emissions that turn into high cirrus clouds and do block the sun. Claims by Dane Wigington that high bypass jet engines will only leave a visible trail under extreme conditions are lies and complete nonsense. But don't take my word for it. Read the science right here. Add to that the fact that we have thousands more aircraft with high bypass jet engines flying today in all sorts of directions, direct to their destinations. Decades ago, we used these airways in the sky that connected through navigational transmitters on the ground. So the white stripes were more aligned, but they still got separated due to high altitude winds, as evidenced in this 1967 photograph. Today, we use inertial guidance systems that do not rely on any external signals and can fly direct to any point on the globe. So this makes the white lines parallel to one another, and they cross in all sorts of patterns, convincing some paranoid people on the ground that it's gotta be deliberate, especially when traffic gets really backed up and air traffic control asks passenger jets to do a 360-degree turn at a high altitude or puts them in racetrack holding patterns at lower altitudes, something that I have done numerous times, circling back and flying through my own visible jet exhaust. So jet exhausts that turn into high cirrus clouds do block the sun for sure, and you don't have to be a rocket scientist to understand that. And this, of course, gives rise to the sun blocking idea that idiots like Bill Gates are proposing because they think that this will stop global warming. But they want to take it higher with balloons where you don't see it. And that is in the stratosphere, higher than most jets fly, with one very inconvenient exception. And that is this. In the northern latitudes, particularly in the wintertime, the stratosphere is lower and exactly where passenger jets fly, particularly over the North Atlantic tracks that connect the continents by air with over 2,000 flights every single day. So we are injecting minute particles into the stratosphere, and we've been doing this for decades. You just can't see it, again, because it's too dry up there for the white stripes to form. You can sometimes see it in the troposphere, depending upon atmospheric conditions. And we're doing this to ourselves. It's not a secret government project. How much has this affected the climate? Well, according to the latest reports from the International Panel on Climate Change, it has actually caused a net warming effect, not a cooling effect. We can lessen the visible white stripes in the sky by demanding sulfur and aromatics be reduced and ultimately removed from jet fuel. The technology and cleaner fuel formulations already exist. Sustainable aviation fuels naturally contain far less of these harmful compounds. This is not some far off dream, it's something that we can push for right now through regulation and consumer pressure on the aviation industry. We can also get bluer skies by having jets avoid the ice supersaturated areas that are conducive to creating those long-lasting visible white stripes, simply by adjusting their altitude up or down a couple thousand feet. These ice supersaturated regions are thin layers in the upper troposphere, where the relative humidity with respect to the ice exceeds 100%. Research shows that they have a median depth of only about 2,000 feet. A randomized controlled trial demonstrated a 64% reduction in contrails with just minor altitude changes. And we only need to target a small fraction of flights to make a really big difference. There are already projects underway to accomplish this, and one is called Project MIST, launched by Boeing and Honeywell in March of 2026. Here, water vapor sensing systems are placed on aircraft, providing real-time information to other pilots so that those areas are avoided, similar to how pilots are warned in real time about how to avoid turbulent altitudes. The bottom line is that the Earth is a living, breathing ecosystem that is very resilient and can handle whatever man throws at it. But the resilience of the Earth is not a reason for complacency. It's a reason for humility. If we force the Earth to keep correcting our disruptions, we will get stronger storms, shifting rain belts, and biodiversity turnovers. God gave us this Earth to have dominion over it. Therefore, we should be good stewards, stop polluting it, and stop trying to force the always changing climate to change in the direction that we think it should go. God also gave you a physical body to take care of. It was designed with an epithelial barrier to protect you from external threats. So stop worrying about what might be falling from 8 miles above your head that's not going to make it through that barrier. There's a more serious problem of ignoring that protective barrier and directly injecting and polluting the bloodstreams of our children with products called vaccines. This has caused massive increases in autism and chronic disease. If we don't get that under control, we're screwed. Thanks for watching. Thanks for staying smart.